Imagine watching your hungry cattle pace by the fence while some fake security guard blocks your ranch gate, laughing as she forces a 68-year-old black man to wade through mud just to feed his animals. That's exactly what Patricia Kellerman did to Jerome Washington. This wannabe HOA enforcer parked her lifted Suburban across his family's ranch entrance every single morning, clipboard in hand, fake badge gleaming, acting like she owned land that's been in his family since 1954. She'd sit there for hours, air conditioning running, watching this elderly rancher struggle to care for livestock that were literally going hungry because of her power trip. But here's what Patricia didn't know. Jerome spent 35 years as a master welder for Union Pacific Railroad, moving derailed freight cars weighing 300 tons. And he's got welding chains, a hydraulic winch, and the patience of a man who's had enough of people trying to take what his grandfather died for. What would you do if some bully with a fake badge was starving your animals while calling you boy in 2025? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and share your worst HOA nightmare. Jerome Washington inherited Sweetwater Ranch from his grandfather Samuel, a Tuskegee airman who bought these 50 acres with his VA benefits and savings from sharecropping back in 1954. Samuel Washington had survived Nazi fighters over Italy, Jim Crow in Alabama, and 3 decades of people telling him where he couldn't live, work, or own property. This Texas prairie land represented everything he fought for: freedom, dignity, and a legacy for his children that nobody could take away. The land sits in what used to be absolute middle of nowhere, Texas rolling hills, where the biggest excitement was watching thunderstorms build over endless horizon. That was before the Meadowbrook estates sprouted up around them like weeds after heavy rain, bringing HOA politics and suburban attitudes to what used to be ranching country. Walk onto Jerome's property on a summer morning and you'll smell 4 generations of honest work: worn leather chaps hanging in the barn that his grandfather built with his own hands, sweet Timothy hay floating in golden shafts of sunlight, and that clean metallic tang of well water pumped up from 400 feet down. The wooden fence posts still hold the scent of creosote from when Samuel first set them, and every weathered board tells a story of storms survived and seasons endured. This is where Jerome raised 3 kids after his wife Carmen passed from cancer, sent all 3 to college on cattle money, 2 engineers and a teacher, and now tends 40 head of black Angus with help from his grandson Deshaun. The boy's 20, sharp as a tack, studying agricultural business at Prairie View A&M, and spending his summers learning that the best business education starts with understanding how real people solve real problems. 8 years ago, developers carved up the surrounding prairie into cookie-cutter houses with names like Tuscany Meadows and Heritage Hills because apparently every suburb in America has to sound like Italian wine country or colonial history they never lived through. The new residents formed the Meadowbrook HOA faster than you could say property values, and they elected Patricia Kellerman as their self-appointed community standards coordinator. Patricia is a 52-year-old divorced insurance adjuster who moved down from Minnesota after her second marriage collapsed. She drives a lifted Chevy Suburban with vanity plates reading RL Tour 2 and carries herself like she's got actual authority instead of just a laminated badge she printed at Office Depot. Her diesel engine sounds like an angry chainsaw, and she guns it just to make noise whenever she parks, sending thick black exhaust across Jerome's pasture like a deliberate insult to everything natural. Here's where Patricia gets clever and dangerous. She starts parking across Jerome's gate every morning at 6:45 sharp, claiming his unsightly agricultural activities violate community standards and hurt property values. She takes photos, writes citations on official-looking forms, and threatens legal action. From her insurance background, she knows most elderly property owners can't afford to fight legal battles, even frivolous ones. It's a calculated strategy: harass them into compliance or bankruptcy. But here's the kicker that'll make your blood boil. Jerome's property was never part of the HOA. His land predates that subdivision by 70 years, with deed records that go back to when Eisenhower was president, and his grandfather was fighting just for the right to buy property as a black veteran. Patricia's counting on Jerome being too old, too poor, or too intimidated to prove it in court. The racial undertones start subtle but get uglier fast. When Jerome politely explains that he never signed any HOA agreements, Patricia's response reveals her true colors. "Well, boy," she says with a smirk, "things change around here. This neighborhood has standards now, and you people are going to follow them, whether you like it or not." The word boy hits like a slap across the face. The same word his grandfather heard from white folks who thought they owned him. When Jerome corrects her, "My name is Mr. Washington, ma'am," Patricia just laughs. "I'll call you whatever I think is appropriate. I've got friends at City Hall who understand how to handle situations like this." The sound of her truck door slamming echoes across the pasture like a gunshot, spooking his cattle and sending them trotting toward the back fence. But Jerome just stands there watching her drive away, remembering something his grandfather once told him. "Son, some folks will always see your skin before they see your soul. But this land don't care what color you are. It just cares how hard you work it and how much you love it." What Patricia doesn't realize is that she just declared war on a man who spent 35 years solving problems with precision welding, hydraulic pressure, and the kind of patient planning that keeps freight trains running on schedule. Jerome's also learned that in property disputes, documentation beats intimidation every single time, a lesson that will serve him well in the coming weeks. Standing in his kitchen that evening, the familiar creak of settling timber around him, Jerome watches cattle that have grazed this same grass for 4 generations. His grandfather's Purple Heart sits in a frame next to the original deed, a daily reminder that some things are worth fighting for. If Patricia wants to play games with fake authority, she's about to learn what happens when you underestimate a man whose family has been defending this land since before she was born. Monday morning, 6:45 a.m. sharp. Patricia's back. But this time, she's not just blocking the gate. She's brought a folding chair and a cooler, turning Jerome's property line into her personal command post. She sets up camp like she's claiming territory, her diesel engine idling for 25 minutes just to pump black smoke across his pasture before she finally shuts it off. The impact hits immediately. Jerome can't get his feed truck through to the back pasture, where his pregnant heifers are waiting. These animals have been on the same feeding schedule for years, and suddenly they're gathering by the gate, confused and hungry, their low mooing carrying across the morning air like a chorus of complaints. Deshawn has to park his beat-up Camaro a quarter-mile down the county road and hike through knee-high grass just to help with morning chores. The prairie grass is still wet with dew, soaking through his work boots, and he arrives at the barn looking like he's been swimming in a green lake. "This is crazy, Grandpa," he says, pulling cockleburrs from his jacket. "She can't just camp out on our property line like some kind of suburban dictator." But Patricia's getting bolder. She waves mockingly at Jerome when he approaches the fence, like they're old friends having a neighborly chat. "Morning, Jerome," she calls out, deliberately dropping the "Mr." like she's addressing a child, just documenting some concerns about agricultural odors affecting our property values. You understand, community standards and all that. What really gets under Jerome's skin is how she says agricultural odors, like she's describing a toxic waste dump, when what she's actually smelling is honest dirt, hay and cattle, the same scents that built half of Texas and fed generations of American families. Then comes the twist that changes everything. Deshawn discovers Patricia's been filing police reports, claiming Jerome threatened her when he asked her to move her truck. Real police reports with case numbers and everything, but with a racial angle that makes Jerome's blood run cold. Deputy Rodriguez, who's known Jerome since high school, pulls him aside at the feed store to deliver a warning that chills him to the bone. "Jerome, I hate to tell you this," Rodriguez says, his voice low and serious, "but she's building a paper trail with racial implications. 3 separate incident reports claiming verbal threats and aggressive behavior. I know it's bull, but she's using language like intimidating and aggressive blackmail that plays into certain assumptions. If this goes to court, she's going to have documentation, and you're going to have your word against a white woman's in rural Texas." That evening, sitting at his kitchen table with the smell of Carmen's old coffee percolator filling the air, Jerome starts his own documentation project. He photographs every incident, writes down exact quotes, including Patricia's racial slurs, and records precisely what she says and does. His railroad experience taught him that the difference between a minor delay and a major disaster usually comes down to keeping accurate records. Deshawn brings his laptop and starts researching property law at the county courthouse website. The old building's records go back to territorial days, and he discovers something interesting. Texas property owners can request survey verification from the county to officially establish boundaries. It costs about $400, but it creates legal documentation that's admissible in court, the kind of ironclad proof that shuts down property disputes before they start. We need to think like lawyers, not like ranchers, Deshawn tells his grandfather, pulling up deed records that show their land boundaries with surveyor precision. She's playing a legal game with racial undertones, so we beat her at her own game with facts she can't argue with. But Patricia's not finished escalating. She recruits two other HOA board members to join her enforcement actions. Dale Hutchinson, a retired insurance adjuster with too much time on his hands, and Karen Mitchell, a real estate agent who sees dollar signs every time she looks at undeveloped land. Suddenly, the harassment has backup singers, and now there are 3 vehicles parked at different spots along Jerome's fence line, their owners acting like they're conducting official business instead of running an organized intimidation campaign. The racial element becomes impossible to ignore when Patricia starts describing Jerome to other residents as that aggressive black man who refuses to respect community standards and has an attitude problem with authority. She tells newer subdivision residents that his cattle operation brings down the neighborhood and attracts the wrong element, code words that every black family in America recognizes. The community starts picking sides, and it gets ugly fast. Some subdivision residents support Patricia because they moved to the suburbs to escape exactly this kind of rural reality, and some of them have never lived next to a black family before. Others think she's lost her mind, but they're afraid to speak up because she controls who gets HOA violation notices for things like mailbox height and lawn maintenance. Jerome's neighbor, Mrs. Elena Vasquez, an elderly Mexican-American woman who grows the best tomatoes in the county, stops by with a basket of fresh vegetables and some wisdom that cuts right to the heart of the matter. "Mijo," she tells him, her accent thick but her meaning crystal clear. "I've seen this before, in my country and here too. Some people, they think they can take what's not theirs just because they don't like who owns it. But you got papers, you got history, and you got rights. Don't let them make you small." Standing in his barn that night, running his weathered hands along chains that once pulled derailed freight cars back onto track, Jerome makes a decision. If Patricia wants to play documentation games with racial undertones, he'll give her more documentation than she bargained for. But unlike her fake authority and manufactured complaints, his evidence is going to be real, accurate, and absolutely devastating when the time comes to use it. The smell of motor oil and old leather fills his nostrils as he checks his tractor's hydraulic system. Just routine maintenance, of course, but deep down, he's starting to plan for a confrontation that's going to require more than paperwork to resolve. By Thursday, Patricia's turned harassment into a science with racial motivation that can't be denied. She's recruited 2 other HOA board members, and now 3 trucks form a rolling blockade around Jerome's property, coordinating through a WhatsApp group they've named Neighborhood Watch, like they're some kind of suburban militia protecting white property values from black encroachment. The psychological warfare gets sophisticated fast. They show up at different times: early morning when Jerome is trying to feed cattle, lunch when his hay supplier makes deliveries, late evening when he's bringing animals in for the night. It's impossible to predict when his gate will be blocked, turning every simple ranch task into a strategic military operation. The business impact hits like a freight train derailing in slow motion. Jerome's hay supplier, a gruff old-timer named Buck Williams, gets tired of parking on the county road and hiking bales across a quarter-mile of prairie. "Sorry, Jerome," Buck says, his weathered face apologetic but firm, "but I can't run my business around some crazy woman's schedule. Call me when you get this sorted out." Dr. Sarah Martinez, the large animal veterinarian who's been treating Jerome's cattle for 12 years, faces the same problem during an emergency call. One of his pregnant heifers is showing signs of distress, but she has to abandon her truck loaded with medical equipment and run across the pasture carrying what she can. The delay costs precious minutes, and though the calf survives, Dr. Martinez pulls Jerome aside afterward with concern etched across her face. "This harassment is affecting your animal's health," she says bluntly. "Stressed cattle don't breed well, don't gain weight properly, and don't produce milk. If this continues, you're looking at serious financial losses." That's when Deshawn makes a discovery that changes the entire game. While researching HOA regulations online, he stumbles across Patricia's social media posts from her neighborhood Facebook group. But these aren't normal community updates. They're thinly veiled racist rants about how certain types of people don't maintain their properties properly, and how agricultural operations attract crime and lower property values. "Grandpa, look at this," Deshawn says, his laptop screen glowing in the kitchen lamplight. "She's been telling people that our ranch is temporary agricultural use that will be developed into retail space within 3 years. She's literally using our land as a selling point for higher home prices while telling everyone we don't belong here. The lies get more elaborate and more racial every day." Patricia tells new subdivision residents that Jerome's cattle operation carries diseases that could affect their children, that his unsupervised agricultural activities violate county health codes, and that having that type of operation so close to their homes creates safety concerns for their families. She's not just harassing Jerome, she's systematically destroying his reputation in the community using racial fear-mongering. Enter Marcus Johnson, a civil rights attorney who grew up on a farm 60 miles south before law school turned him into a suit-wearing courtroom fighter. His office smells like fresh coffee and old leather law books, and when Deshawn explains their situation, his expression shifts from professional interest to personal anger. "This isn't just harassment," Johnson says, leaning back in his chair. "This is conspiracy to interfere with business operations with clear racial animus. If she's using code words and making statements about types of people, we've got grounds for federal civil rights violations. But here's the problem. Discrimination lawsuits take 2 years minimum and cost $25,000 up front. Money most folks don't have lying around. That's money Jerome doesn't have, not after Carmen's medical bills cleaned out their savings 5 years ago. But Johnson offers a different approach, one that plays to Jerome's strengths instead of his bank account. In Texas, blocking access to private property for more than 30 minutes constitutes criminal trespass, Johnson explains, pulling out a legal handbook thick as a phone book. Add racial motivation, and it becomes a hate crime enhancement. The trick is catching them in the act with accurate documentation and having law enforcement who'll actually do their job instead of looking the other way. Jerome starts timing Patricia's visits down to the minute, using an old railroad pocket watch that's never been wrong in 35 years of keeping freight schedules. He installs a trail camera, the kind hunters use, disguised as a fence post to capture license plates, faces, and exact duration of each blocking incident, plus audio recordings of Patricia's racial slurs and comments. Deshawn takes the documentation digital, creating a social media campaign that starts getting attention beyond their immediate community. His posts about an elderly black rancher being bullied by fake authorities with racist undertones get shared by civil rights groups across Texas. Suddenly, Jerome's story is reaching people who've faced similar harassment from developers and HOAs, especially black families targeted because of their race. The smell of approaching rain fills the evening air as storm clouds build on the horizon. Mrs. Vasquez stops by with fresh tomatoes and more folk wisdom that cuts straight to the bone. "That woman, she thinks she very smart," she says, nodding toward the subdivision. "But smart people know when they're wrong. Racist people never think they're wrong. She racist people." Standing in his barn that night, checking his tractor's hydraulic system and testing the power winch, Jerome runs his fingers along 300 feet of welding chain, the heavy-duty kind railroads use to pull derailed cars back onto track. Every link weighs about 8 pounds, and the whole assembly could move pretty much anything that gets in its way. Tomorrow, he thinks, might be a good day to make sure all his equipment runs properly. His grandfather didn't survive Nazi Germany and Jim Crow Alabama, just so some racist HOA coordinator could steal his family's land. Week 3 brings Patricia's nuclear option, death by 1,000 government forms, with racial implications that can't be ignored. She files complaints with the county health department, claiming Jerome's cattle operation violates sanitation codes and poses health risks to the predominantly white family neighborhood. She reports him to the EPA for potential groundwater contamination from livestock waste, specifically mentioning concerns about property management standards in minority-owned agricultural operations. She even calls the state agriculture department about unlicensed cattle operations run by unqualified individuals, hoping to trigger expensive inspections that could bankrupt Jerome through bureaucratic fees alone, a tactic that's been used against black farmers for generations. The government harassment machine cranks to life with terrifying efficiency. Monday brings a health inspector, who spends 6 hours measuring distances between cattle areas and the property line, charging Jerome $250 in processing fees even though his operation passes every single inspection with flying colors. Tuesday delivers an EPA compliance officer who tests his well water and finds it cleaner than most city tap water. Another $300 fee for the privilege of proving his innocence against racially motivated complaints. Wednesday's agricultural inspector arrives during a thunderstorm, forcing Jerome to wade through ankle-deep mud to show that his cattle have proper shelter, adequate food, and veterinary care. The inspector, a young black woman fresh out of Texas A&M, immediately recognizes what's happening and apologizes for the obvious harassment. "Between you and me, Mr. Washington," she whispers, while filling out forms in his kitchen, "somebody's trying to paper you to death. I've seen this before." They use regulatory harassment to force black property owners into bankruptcy, then swoop in with lowball offers. It's legal, but it's dirty pool with ugly history. The personal attacks escalate beyond property disputes into character assassination with clear racial undertones. Patricia starts spreading rumors that Jerome is too old and set in his ways to safely operate farm equipment, posting on Nextdoor about dangerous elderly drivers and suggesting his family should make responsible decisions about his capabilities, language that echoes historical attacks on black men's competence and decision-making authority. She implies he's losing his mental faculties, can't manage his finances properly, and poses a safety threat to the family-oriented community, all coded language designed to strip away his dignity and property rights. The financial pressure mounts like water behind a cracking dam. Between inspection fees, lost business from block deliveries, and cattle stress affecting milk production, Jerome's looking at serious money problems. He considers selling 3 of his breeding heifers to cover costs, animals with names like Buttercup, Rosie, and Sweet Tea that he's raised from calves. The thought of selling them feels like betraying old friends and family legacy. Then, Deputy Rodriguez delivers a warning that chills Jerome to the bone. During a casual conversation at the feed store, Rodriguez quietly mentions that Patricia's been asking about Jerome's military service records, he served in Desert Storm, his financial situation, and whether there are legal procedures for removing elderly minorities from property management decisions. "She's fishing for ammunition," Rodriguez says, his voice barely above a whisper. "Competency hearings, financial guardianship, that kind of thing. She's been asking if black veterans have higher rates of PTSD or mental health issues. I can't prove anything yet, but somebody's coaching her on how to challenge an elderly black property owner's legal capacity using racial stereotypes. The community split becomes a neighborhood civil war with clear racial lines. Parents start taking sides based on property values versus civil rights. Team Patricia argues that agricultural operations run by certain people hurt home values and change neighborhood character. Team Jerome quietly supports him but won't speak publicly, afraid of becoming Patricia's next target for HOA violations and regulatory complaints. That's when Deshawn makes another breakthrough that shifts the entire battlefield. While researching HOA management regulations at Prairie View's law library, he discovers that Patricia never actually registered as an HOA management company with the state. Her official enforcement actions have zero legal standing. She's been operating without proper credentials, while collecting fees for services she can't legally provide. "Grandpa, this is huge," Deshawn says, spreading legal documents across the kitchen table. In Texas, HOA management companies must be licensed and bonded. Operating without credentials while collecting fees is a Class B misdemeanor, up to 180 days in jail and a $2,000 fine. Everything she's done is fraud. Instead of reacting emotionally like Patricia expects, Jerome starts building relationships throughout the community. He helps Mrs. Vasquez repair her fence after a storm. He offers hay to a subdivision family whose decorative horses need feeding during a drought. He loans his tractor to clear fallen trees from the county road after severe weather. Every act of neighborly kindness creates witnesses who see the real Jerome versus Patricia's painted picture of a dangerous, incompetent black man who doesn't belong in their community. These people start questioning why someone so helpful and reliable would suddenly become a threat to neighborhood safety. The chains make their quiet appearance during this phase. Jerome orders 300 feet of welding chain from his friend at the railroad salvage yard, the industrial strength kind used to pull 60-ton freight cars back onto track after derailments. He stores them in his barn, telling curious neighbors he's updating some ranch equipment. The metallic smell of chain oil and the substantial weight of each 8-pound link bring back memories of solving problems with precision and power instead of politics and prejudice. When a freight train derails, you don't negotiate with it or file paperwork. You hook up chains and apply the right leverage to move massive objects back where they belong. Standing in his barn during a late evening thunderstorm, rain drumming against the tin roof like machine gun fire, Jerome tests his old Ford tractor's hydraulic system and winch mechanism. Everything runs smooth as silk, ready for whatever job needs doing. Tomorrow might bring another blocked gate, another round of harassment, another attempt to steal his family's legacy through racist, bureaucratic warfare. But Jerome Washington is done playing defense. His grandfather didn't survive Nazi fighters, and Jim Crow just so some suburban racist could drive him off land that's been in their family for 70 years. The breakthrough comes on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon when Deshawn is digging through county records at the courthouse, the air conditioning barely cutting through the oppressive Texas heat. He's hunched over property tax documents, following a hunch about Patricia's financial situation, when he discovers something that makes his blood run cold. Patricia Kellerman is 4 months behind on property taxes. Her house, that fancy suburban palace she's supposedly protecting property values for, is heading toward tax foreclosure. But that's just the appetizer. Her unlicensed HOA management operation owes $18,000 in unpaid state fees and penalties, money that should have been paid months ago to keep her legally operating. Grandpa, she's not just racist and power-hungry, Deshawn says, spreading documents across the kitchen table like a detective building a murder case. She's financially desperate. Her insurance career collapsed after discrimination complaints in Minnesota. Her truck payments are overdue, and look at this. He points to a stack of financial records. She's been using HOA fees to cover personal expenses. That's embezzlement, plain and simple. The water rights angle reveals itself through property development records that Deshawn uncovers buried in county planning documents. Patricia hasn't just been randomly harassing Jerome with racist attacks. She's been researching groundwater rights transfers, studying how to force property sales, and building a case for claiming his underground water access. But here's the real kicker that changes everything. Patricia is secretly working with Pinnacle Development Corporation, a Dallas-based company that specializes in turning rural land into shopping centers. They need Jerome's groundwater access to make their project viable, and they're paying Patricia a $10,000 finder's fee for every property she helps them acquire, with bonuses for properties owned by minorities who might be easier to intimidate. Deshawn discovers emails between Patricia and Pinnacle Development discussing their rural acquisition strategy, a cold-blooded plan to use regulatory harassment, financial pressure, and racial intimidation to force small landowners into distressed sales. The emails contain casual racist language about dealing with certain demographics and using appropriate pressure points. In Texas, groundwater rights belong to surface property owners. So, forcing Jerome off his land through systematic harassment and racial intimidation could constitute conspiracy to commit theft with hate crime enhancements if proven in court. The fake credential scandal explodes when Deshawn finds Patricia's HOA enforcement officer certificates stored in her computer files, complete with home printer metadata showing they were created last month using Microsoft Word templates. She has no legal authority to issue citations, demand compliance, or take enforcement photos. Every official-looking document she's waved around is worthless paper backed by nothing but intimidation and racial prejudice. Deputy Rodriguez provides the final piece during a private conversation that reveals the scope of Patricia's racist desperation. She's been pressuring the sheriff's department to arrest Jerome for agricultural violations, asking about civil forfeiture laws, and researching legal ways to force elderly black property owners off their land. She's asked me 5 times about competency hearings and financial guardianship procedures specifically for black veterans. Rodriguez tells Deshawn quietly, she wants to know if we can declare your grandfather mentally unfit to manage property, claiming PTSD or age-related cognitive decline. She's even suggested that his people don't understand modern property management. It's sick, but it's also evidence of conspiracy with racial animus, if we can prove coordination with outside parties. The development company connection traces back through public records, showing Pinnacle Development has targeted 12 other ranches and farms in the county using identical tactics, with 8 of those properties owned by Black or Hispanic families. Each property sits on valuable water rights or development-ready land. Each owner faced similar harassment campaigns involving fake officials, regulatory complaints, and financial pressure designed to force distress sales. This isn't personal harassment with racial undertones. It's organized crime disguised as suburban community management, specifically targeting minority landowners who historically have less political power and legal resources to fight back. Patricia's not just a power-mad HOA president. She's the local face of a systematic scheme to steal family land through legal manipulation and racial intimidation, a modern version of the same tactics used to steal Black property throughout American history. Standing in his kitchen that evening, reading through evidence that proves his family's under attack by professional land thieves using racist tactics, Jerome realizes this fight is bigger than just his ranch. Every minority landowner in Texas faces the same threat from developers who use racial bias as a weapon against people who can't afford to fight back. But unlike their previous victims, they picked the wrong target. Jerome Washington isn't going anywhere, and he's about to teach Pinnacle Development and their local enforcer that some Black men bite back harder than their grandfathers ever imagined possible. Jerome's kitchen table transforms into a war room that would make a railroad dispatcher proud. County maps spread across the worn wooden surface, alongside property deeds, HOA documents, and Deshawn's meticulously organized legal research. The familiar smell of fresh coffee mingles with the musty scent of old documents, as 4 generations of Black resilience meet modern legal strategy. The alliance builds quickly once other targeted property owners realize they're not fighting alone. Horse trainer Linda Martinez discovers her harassment matches Jerome's timeline perfectly, and she's Latina. Hay farmer Robert Big Jim Thompson, who's Black, admits he's been getting identical fake citations from Patricia's crew. 2 retirees with small homesteads, the elderly Nguyen couple and Vietnam veteran Tom Rodriguez, all have similar stories of coordinated harassment with racial undertones. Marcus Johnson's law office becomes mission control for their counterattack. The civil rights attorney spreads their evidence across his conference table like a general planning D-Day, explaining their multi-pronged strategy: criminal charges against Patricia for fraud and racial intimidation, a federal civil rights conspiracy lawsuit against Pinnacle Development, a counter-harassment injunction to stop the blocking, and public exposure to prevent future victims. This is what we call a color of law violation with racial animus, Johnson explains, his finger tracing through federal statutes. When someone pretends to have official authority they don't possess while targeting victims based on race, it becomes a federal civil rights crime, punishable by up to 15 years in prison. Patricia's fake badge and racist citations just bought her a one-way ticket to serious federal time. Deshawn creates a shared digital folder where all 6 property owners upload photos, videos, and documentation of harassment incidents. The evidence pile grows to over 300 documented violations across all properties, showing a clear pattern of coordinated criminal activity with racial targeting spanning months of systematic intimidation. Deputy Rodriguez becomes their inside ally when he reveals that his own grandfather lost his farm to similar racist tactics back in the 1980s. Developers have been running this scam for decades, especially against Black and Hispanic families, he admits privately. But nobody's ever had enough documentation to prove racial conspiracy. You folks might be the first to nail them with federal hate crime enhancements. Rodriguez agrees to time his patrols to catch Patricia's crew in the act, while providing official incident reports that will stand up in federal court. He also explains that Texas property owners can request citizens' arrest authority when trespassing occurs repeatedly with racial motivation, allowing them to detain violators until police arrive, but only with proper training and ironclad documentation. The media strategy develops when Deshawn contacts Keisha Williams, an investigative reporter for the Houston Chronicle, who specializes in civil rights violations and developer corruption across Texas. Williams jumps at the story because it connects to a broader pattern of racist land theft she's been investigating for years. "This is exactly what I've been looking for," Williams tells them during a meeting at the ranch. Pinnacle development keeps showing up in property disputes involving minority families, but nobody's had enough evidence to prove organized racial conspiracy. Your documentation could break this wide open. Community organizing accelerates when Jerome hosts a barbecue at his ranch, inviting subdivision residents who've privately supported him but were afraid to speak publicly. 37 families show up, and the conversation reveals that most residents hate Patricia's tactics and racist rhetoric, but feared becoming her next harassment targets. "We moved here for peace and quiet," admits Sarah Patterson, a nurse who lives 4 houses down from Patricia. "Instead, we got a neighborhood dictator who threatens anyone who disagrees with her and uses racial slurs when she thinks nobody's listening. You standing up to her gives the rest of us permission to fight back against this racist garbage." The technical solution emerges from Jerome's railroad experience. Instead of trying to move an immovable object, you change the terrain underneath it. He starts planning property modifications that will make vehicle blocking physically impossible while remaining completely legal. Property owners can install cattle guards, metal grates that prevent livestock from crossing, on their own driveways without permits, as long as they don't block public roads. Vehicles can cross them safely, but parking on them becomes uncomfortable and potentially damaging to tires and suspension systems. But Jerome's chain strategy represents the real masterstroke. Using welding chains and his tractor's hydraulic winch, he can legally remove trespassing vehicles from his property line. The same technique railroads use to clear debris from tracks. It's not about damaging property, it's about applying the right leverage to move racist obstacles back where they belong. Johnson ensures everything they plan stays perfectly legal. "Patricia has no right to park on private property, especially not with racial motivation," he explains. "Property owners can remove trespassing vehicles, and using minimum necessary force to clear racially motivated blockades is protected under both Texas property law and federal civil rights statutes." The timing strategy targets maximum impact during the next HOA meeting, when Patricia will publicly defend her actions in front of 80 subdivision residents. Maximum witnesses, maximum embarrassment, maximum exposure of her racist fraud. Equipment preparation becomes almost ritualistic. Jerome services his 1985 Ford tractor, tests the hydraulic winch, and practices connecting the welding chains. Deshawn videos the process for documentation, showing that everything operates safely and professionally. Standing in his barn on the eve of their counterattack, surrounded by the tools and chains that built American infrastructure, Jerome reflects on his grandfather's advice. "Son, sometimes you take a stand not because you'll win, but because it's right. But if you're going to stand, you better be smart about it." Tomorrow, Patricia Kellerman learns what happens when racist fake authority meets real power backed by 4 generations of black determination. Desperation makes Patricia dangerous, and sensing her racist scheme unraveling, she decides to force the nuclear option. On a scorching Monday morning, she files a restraining order against Jerome, claiming he's threatened her with heavy machinery and represents a clear danger to the safe, family-oriented community, language loaded with racial implications about dangerous black men. The court documents paint him as an unstable, elderly black man whose erratic behavior with farm equipment poses an imminent threat to neighborhood safety, specifically mentioning his aggressive demeanor typical of his demographic. The false emergency call comes at 6:15 a.m., jarring Jerome awake with its sheer racist audacity. Patricia dials 911, claiming Jerome is acting aggressively with his tractor near the property line and suggesting he might ram her vehicle or hurt innocent white families. She's gambling that emergency responders will arrest the black man first and ask questions later, clearing the way for a psychiatric evaluation that could strip away his property rights. Her media manipulation attempt targets a Dallas TV station where she presents herself as a brave suburban mother protecting white families from an unstable black neighbor who refuses to follow basic community standards and has an attitude problem with authority figures. The reporter, hungry for conflict stories, initially buys her narrative about agricultural threats to suburban safety, but the restraining order hearing becomes Patricia's first major legal defeat. She arrives with doctored photos showing Jerome's tractor menacingly positioned near her truck, along with written statements from paid supporters claiming they've witnessed threatening behavior by an aggressive black male who doesn't respect white authority. However, Marcus Johnson is ready with video evidence showing Patricia's systematic harassment, racist comments, and coordinated blocking campaigns. The audio recordings of her calling Jerome boy and making statements about his people play in open court, shocking even the bailiff. Judge Patricia Wells, a no-nonsense former prosecutor who happens to be black herself, reviews the evidence with growing fury. "Ms. Kellerman," she says sharply, "this appears to be a property dispute where you're the aggressor using racially motivated harassment tactics. Your restraining order is denied, and I'm warning you about filing frivolous claims that waste this court's time while promoting racial discrimination." Frustrated by her legal defeat and sensing time running out, Patricia escalates to physical intimidation with clear racial overtones. She hires 3 men from her ex-husband's construction company, thick-necked bulldogs named Rick, Danny, and Travis, who wear hard hats and safety vests to look official. Their massive work trucks join Patricia's Suburban in creating a complete blockade that turns Jerome's gate into an impenetrable wall of steel and diesel fumes. The physical confrontation erupts when Jerome approaches to ask them to move so he can check on a sick calf. Rick, a former high school football player gone to fat, steps forward aggressively. "You need to back off, boy," he growls, shoving Jerome backward hard enough to make him stumble. "This is official business and you people need to learn your place. Maybe it's time somebody taught you some respect." But Rick made one crucial mistake. Deshawn captured everything on video from his position across the county road. The assault, combined with the racial slurs, gives them grounds for federal hate crime charges and proves Patricia's harassment campaign has escalated to racially motivated violence against a 68-year-old black veteran trying to care for his livestock. Community fear tactics intensify as Patricia spreads rumors through Nextdoor and Facebook that Jerome's cattle operation brings the wrong element into their family neighborhood and poses health risks specifically to white children. She posts fake health warnings about groundwater contamination, livestock parasites, and airborne pathogens supposedly spreading from the improperly managed ranch to surrounding homes. The manufactured panic works on some newer residents who've never lived near black families and don't know enough about agriculture to spot the lies. Patricia feeds their racial anxieties by suggesting that agricultural operations run by certain people operate under different health standards. The financial attack reaches predatory levels when Patricia files complaints with the IRS claiming Jerome isn't paying proper agricultural taxes, specifically questioning whether people in his situation understand complex tax obligations. She also reports him to the state agriculture department for unlicensed livestock operations, hoping to trigger expensive compliance inspections that could bankrupt him through bureaucratic fees, a tactic historically used to drive black farmers off their land. Deputy Rodriguez's investigation reveals the smoking gun that proves Patricia's scheme has corporate backing with clear racial targeting. Pinnacle Development has already submitted preliminary development plans for a shopping center that includes Jerome's property despite not owning it yet. The internal emails discuss targeting minority-owned properties as easier acquisitions with less community resistance. "She's not just some crazy racist HOA lady," Rodriguez explains privately to Deshawn. "She's the local face of an organized land grab that specifically targets black and Hispanic property owners. These developers have done this before across the South, and they'll keep doing it until somebody stops them." Deshawn's social media investigation uncovers Patricia's history in Minnesota, where she used identical tactics against 4 other minority property owners. One elderly black farmer lost his land to tax foreclosure after expensive harassment campaigns. A Hispanic family sold at below market prices just to escape the racist stress. A Native American couple is still fighting in federal court, their life savings consumed by legal fees. The pattern evidence proves Pinnacle Development operates with a standard racist playbook: identify vulnerable minority-owned properties near developing areas, plant agents in local HOAs or civic groups, use regulatory harassment combined with racial intimidation to create financial pressure, offer lowball buyouts to desperate owners, then flip the land to commercial developers for massive profits. Marcus Johnson's evidence compilation now includes documentation proving conspiracy, fraud, impersonation of officials, assault, harassment, racial intimidation, and interstate patterns of organized crime with hate crime enhancements. What started as a property dispute has grown into a federal racketeering case with civil rights violations affecting victims across multiple states. Standing in his barn that evening, loading 300 feet of railroad chain into his truck bed, Jerome reflects that tomorrow will bring either resolution or escalation beyond anyone's imagination. But after weeks of being pushed around by racist bullies, he's ready to push back with the kind of leverage that moves freight trains and breaks the chains of racial oppression. The metallic clink of chain links settling against truck metal sounds like justice preparing to roll, justice that his grandfather would recognize and his grandson will remember. The morning of reckoning arrives with typical Texas heat, the sun already merciless at 6 a.m. as Patricia parks her Suburban across Jerome's gate with theatrical precision. But today's different. She's brought camping chairs, a cooler full of ice, and enough supplies to stage a day-long occupation. Her plan is to dominate the property line until evening, then march into the HOA meeting as the undisputed queen of suburban white authority. Deshawn positions himself across the county road with video equipment, documenting everything from multiple angles, while Deputy Rodriguez parks his patrol car nearby. Officially, he's responding to a property dispute call, but really, he's there to ensure whatever happens next stays within legal boundaries, while protecting Jerome from any racist retaliation. The engineering moment arrives when Jerome backs his 1985 Ford tractor out of the barn, its diesel engine rumbling like controlled thunder. 35 years of moving derailed freight cars taught him that the right leverage can move anything, including racist obstacles that think they can't be moved. The 300 feet of railroad chain clanks against itself in his truck bed as he positions everything with mathematical precision, the same precision his grandfather used to navigate bomber formations over Nazi Germany. Patricia sits in her air-conditioned cab, windows up, texting frantically about her upcoming presentation to the HOA board. She's so focused on describing Jerome as a dangerous black man with heavy machinery that she doesn't notice the chain being looped through her rear trailer hitch and connected to his tractor's hydraulic winch with professional efficiency. The moment of truth demonstrates pure physics overcoming suburban racism. When Jerome engages his winch, Patricia's Suburban starts moving sideways away from the gate. Despite her frantic attempts to brake or shift into park, the tractor's 18,000 pounds of weight and mechanical advantage easily overcome her vehicle's resistance, dragging her SUV across the gravel like a child's toy being pulled by a determined adult. Her oversized tires scrape and smoke against the pavement, leaving black rubber streaks that spell out her humiliation in permanent ink. The sound is magnificent, metal grinding against asphalt, diesel engines roaring in mechanical argument, and Patricia's muffled screaming from inside her cab as physics teaches her about real authority. The creek destination showcases Jerome's brilliant strategy. He doesn't drag her truck into the water. That would be property damage and give her legal ammunition. Instead, he positions it on the muddy bank where it sinks axle deep in creek-bottom mud, completely immobilized but mechanically undamaged. Maximum humiliation, minimum legal liability. Patricia explodes from her truck like a cartoon character, screaming about property destruction and theft while mud squishes around her designer boots. But her racist fury reveals itself immediately. "You can't do this to me. You people don't have the right. I'll have you arrested. You belong in chains, not operating machinery." Deputy Rodriguez calmly explains that moving a trespassing vehicle off private property is perfectly legal, and since no mechanical damage occurred, the truck is just temporarily stuck in natural terrain. No crime has been committed, except Patricia's public display of racist threats, which Rodriguez dutifully records in his official report. The gathering crowd materializes as word spreads through the subdivision faster than wildfire. By noon, 60 residents have gathered to witness the spectacle. Some are laughing and recording with smartphones. Others are calling tow trucks to help extract Patricia's vehicle. And many are openly discussing her racist comments that everyone can now hear clearly. Keisha Williams arrives with a photographer just as Patricia's trying to wade through knee-deep mud to assess her vehicle's situation while screaming racial slurs loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. The visual of an elderly black rancher outsmarting a racist, fake official with simple mechanical ingenuity is perfect for Williams's ongoing investigation into developer harassment schemes. The photos will run on the front page tomorrow, with audio recordings of Patricia's racist meltdown playing on the Chronicle's website. Patricia's desperation reaches peak insanity when she calls 911 claiming her truck was stolen by that black man. But the dispatcher can hear Deputy Rodriguez in the background explaining that he witnessed the entire legal removal of a trespassing vehicle. No crime occurred, just consequences finally catching up with racist criminal behavior. The truth spreads faster than summer lightning when Deshawn posts the video online with the caption, "Racist fake HOA cop gets schooled in property rights by 68-year-old black grandfather." Within hours, it accumulates 200,000 views and thousands of supportive comments from people sharing similar stories of racist developer harassment. Community revelation transforms the neighborhood dynamics in real time. Several subdivision residents approached Jerome to apologize, admitting they knew Patricia's tactics were wrong and racist, but were afraid to speak up. Mrs. Vasquez arrives with fresh lemonade and declares loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Racist woman finally get what she deserve. American justice very good when it work right." Patricia's allies abandon ship faster than rats fleeing a sinking vessel. Rick, Danny, and Travis, the construction workers who helped block the gate and assaulted Jerome with racial slurs, suddenly remember they have urgent jobs elsewhere. Faced with potential federal hate crime charges, they're eager to cooperate with law enforcement and testify against their former employer. The legal trap springs with clockwork precision when Marcus Johnson arrives with sheriff's deputies and FBI agents carrying arrest warrants based on months of documented evidence. Patricia is handcuffed for impersonation of a public official, fraud, conspiracy, racial intimidation, and federal civil rights violations, all while standing knee-deep in creek mud, her white superiority as fictional as her credentials. The arrest triggers search warrants for Patricia's records, revealing the entire Pinnacle development scheme in emails, financial documents, and coordination plans filled with racist language and targeting strategies. Federal authorities launch a full investigation into interstate fraud patterns with racial motivation, and the development company's involvement becomes undeniable evidence of organized hate crime conspiracy. As Patricia's truck gets towed out of the creek at her expense, while she sits in the back of an FBI vehicle, neighborhood power dynamics completely reverse. Residents who were terrorized by her fake authority and racist rhetoric suddenly feel empowered to speak up about financial irregularities, selective enforcement targeting minorities, and abusive tactics they've endured for months. Standing beside his tractor, chains coiled neatly in the truck bed, Jerome watches justice roll forward like a freight train that can't be stopped. His grandfather's spirit seems to whisper in the Texas wind, "Well done, son, well done." The Meadowbrook Community Center buzzes with an electricity that has nothing to do with the air conditioning struggling against August heat. What was supposed to be Patricia's moment of triumph, her grand presentation about protecting white suburban property values from black agricultural threats, has transformed into her public execution. 120 residents pack the room alongside media, law enforcement, civil rights activists, and supporters from other targeted properties, creating standing room only for the trial of the decade. The energy crackles with the tension of a community finally confronting its racist demons. Jerome's entrance triggers spontaneous applause from about two-thirds of the crowd, a sound that reverberates off the cheap paneled walls like thunder rolling across the prairie. The 68-year-old black rancher walks in wearing his best boots and a clean shirt, carrying a folder of documents and the quiet confidence of someone who's already won the war against racist oppression. Behind him, Deshawn beams with pride while Mrs. Vasquez claps enthusiastically from the front row, surrounded by other minority residents who found their courage in Jerome's victory. Margaret Torres, the association's vice president and a retired elementary school teacher, takes control of the meeting with the authority of someone who's managed rowdy children for 30 years. With Patricia in federal custody and the board in chaos, Margaret immediately apologizes to Jerome on behalf of the entire association and calls for a complete investigation into financial irregularities and racist targeting that go far beyond simple harassment. "Before we begin tonight," Margaret announces, her voice carrying clearly across the packed room, "I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Washington for the harassment and racial discrimination he's endured. What happened here was wrong, illegal, and completely contrary to the values this community should represent. We failed him, and we failed ourselves. The public confession session unleashes months of suppressed anger, fear, and guilt. One by one, subdivision residents stand to share their experiences with Patricia's racist bullying tactics. Stories emerge of selective enforcement targeting minority families, financial irregularities in community improvement projects, and personal vendettas disguised as HOA violations with clear racial motivation. Sarah Patterson, the nurse who lives 4 houses from Patricia, stands with shaking hands to address the crowd. She threatened to fine me $500 because my mailbox was 2 inches too tall, she says, her voice growing stronger with each word. But when I questioned the measurement, she said maybe I should ask my black neighbor how he deals with authority figures. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared. I should have fought back like Mr. Washington did. Margaret's financial revelation drops like a bomb in the overheated room. The HOA's books show $31,000 in unexplained expenses and missing funds, money that was supposed to improve community amenities, but apparently went into Patricia's personal accounts and payments to her co-conspirators, with premium rates charged for special enforcement actions against minority property owners. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret continues, her teacher voice cutting through murmurs of outrage, we've been robbed not just of money, but of our sense of community and racial harmony. This ends tonight, and it never happens again. Marcus Johnson approaches the podium with the measured confidence of a civil rights lawyer, delivering a closing argument that will make legal history. He lays out the entire conspiracy in clear terms, his voice carrying across the silent room, like a sermon about justice and equality. This wasn't about community standards or property values, Johnson explains, pointing to charts showing Pinnacle Development's racist targeting timeline. This was an organized scheme to steal Mr. Washington's land through systematic harassment and racial intimidation. The same tactics were used against minority property owners in 6 other states, always targeting Black, Hispanic, and Native American families who historically have less political power to fight back. Deputy Rodriguez provides the law enforcement perspective with military precision, explaining how Patricia's fake credentials, fraudulent reports, and coordination with paid accomplices constitute multiple felonies under Texas and federal civil rights law. His badge and uniform lend official weight to what many residents dismissed as a neighborhood squabble with unfortunate racial overtones. What we're dealing with here, Rodriguez states firmly, is organized crime masquerading as suburban community management with clear racial targeting and hate crime enhancements. Ms. Kellerman faces up to 25 years in federal prison, and her co-conspirators are being arrested across multiple states as we speak. The FBI has opened a full investigation into Pinnacle Development's racist land theft operations. Then comes the mic drop moment that defines the entire evening. Jerome approaches the podium with the slow, measured steps of a man who's carried freight train schedules for 35 years and knows the value of perfect timing. The room falls completely silent as he adjusts the microphone and looks across faces that represent both supporters and former enablers of racism. Folks, he begins, his weathered voice carrying the authority of 4 generations on the same land, I didn't drag that truck into the creek because I was mad, though I was plenty mad. I did it because sometimes the only way to deal with a racist bully is to show them they picked the wrong black man to mess with. The room erupts in sustained applause that drowns out the struggling air conditioning and makes the windows rattle. But this isn't about revenge, Jerome continues when the noise dies down. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else, black, white, brown, or any other color. My grandfather didn't survive Nazi Germany and Jim Crow Alabama just so some suburban racist could steal land that's been in our family for 70 years. This land doesn't care what color I am. It just cares how hard I work it and how much I love it. The standing ovation lasts 7 full minutes, with people crying openly and chanting, "Justice, justice," until Jerome raises his hand for silence. Keisha Williams captures everything for tomorrow's front page, but the real impact comes from residents live streaming the meeting across social media platforms, spreading the story to civil rights communities across Texas and beyond. The hashtag Jerome's Fight trends nationally within hours. Margaret calls for a vote that passes by overwhelming majority, fire the current HOA management company, refund all illegally collected fees with interest, adopt new bylaws specifically protecting minority property rights, establish transparent financial oversight to prevent future corruption, and create a community fund to support targets of racist harassment. Mrs. Vasquez's surprise presentation of a handmade quilt featuring all subdivision families' signatures and the words, "Thank you for standing up for all of us, never again," moves the tough old rancher to tears and brings the entire room to its feet in a standing ovation that shakes the building. Justice has been served, and it tastes like victory over generations of racist oppression. 6 months later, the Meadowbrook subdivision has transformed from a community divided by racist fear into neighbors united by hard-won wisdom about equality and justice. The new HOA leadership works hand in hand with Jerome, even organizing volunteer crews to repair fence damage caused by Patricia's harassment campaign and creating an annual civil rights education program. What started as suburban white supremacy versus black agricultural heritage has evolved into something better: mutual respect between people who choose different ways of living on the same land while sharing the same values of fairness and human dignity. The legal resolution delivers justice with mathematical precision and historic impact. Patricia Kellerman pleads guilty to federal conspiracy and civil rights charges, receiving 12 years in federal prison plus full restitution to all victims. Pinnacle Development faces $4.7 million in fines, loses their business license in 6 states, and gets permanently banned from operating in Texas. 3 executives receive prison sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years for organizing racist land theft schemes. The civil rights lawsuit results in a $2.3 million settlement that Jerome uses to establish the Tuskegee Airmen Agricultural Heritage Foundation, providing legal assistance and financial support to minority families facing similar racist harassment. Community healing happens in ways both practical and profound. Subdivision residents raise $25,000 to help Jerome replace livestock lost during Patricia's veterinary emergency blockades, but more importantly, they volunteer for ranch maintenance, creating genuine friendships between suburban families and their black agricultural neighbor. Kids who once feared the scary black rancher now beg their parents for weekend visits to learn about cattle and horses. Deshawn's law career launches with purpose and national recognition. He graduates summa cum laude from Prairie View Law School and establishes the Texas Minority Property Defense Fund with Marcus Johnson, providing free legal assistance to families facing racist developer harassment. They've already helped 28 families fight similar schemes with a perfect success rate, turning Jerome's victory into a model for civil rights protection. The scholarship program transforms tragedy into opportunity. Using restitution money from Patricia and Pinnacle Development, Jerome establishes the Samuel Washington Agricultural Scholarship for minority students pursuing farming, ranching, or agricultural law. The first recipient is Maria Santos, whose family's small dairy operation faced identical racist developer pressure in neighboring counties before Jerome's case exposed the scheme. Conservation efforts ensure permanent protection for the land that started it all. Jerome partners with the Texas Land Conservancy to place his ranch under an agricultural easement, guaranteeing it can never be developed into commercial property. 7 other targeted minority families follow his example, protecting 400 acres of agricultural heritage from future racist development schemes. The annual festival grows from a neighborhood barbecue into a regional celebration of civil rights progress and rural-suburban cooperation. The first Sweetwater Heritage and Justice Festival draws families from 12 counties for educational demonstrations, soul food, mariachi music, and community building that bridges gaps between different cultures and lifestyles. Media impact spreads far beyond Texas borders. Keisha Williams's investigative series wins a Pulitzer Prize for exposing racist land theft schemes and triggers congressional hearings about developer discrimination tactics. Her reporting helps pass the Minority Property Owner Protection Act, making it a federal felony to use racial intimidation for real estate schemes, legislation that protects vulnerable families across America. Deputy Rodriguez's promotion to detective specializing in hate crimes proves that standing up for civil rights advances everyone's career. He credits the case with teaching him that effective law enforcement requires understanding community dynamics and confronting racial bias, not just enforcing regulations without examining motivation. The technical knowledge legacy lives on in unexpected ways. Jerome's use of railroad engineering principles to solve the racist truck problem becomes a case study in agricultural engineering and civil rights programs, teaching students that sometimes the simplest mechanical solutions work best for complex social problems rooted in historical oppression. Cross-cultural friendship flourishes when Mrs. Vasquez becomes Jerome's closest neighbor and confidant, helping with ranch paperwork while he teaches her grandchildren horseback riding. Their friendship symbolizes the community's transformation from racial suspicion to genuine caring across cultural and generational lines. Financial recovery allows the ranch operation to thrive beyond its previous limitations. With harassment ended and legal costs covered by restitution, Jerome expands his herd to 60 cattle and launches an educational agritourism program where suburban kids learn about farming through weekend visits that also teach civil rights history. Personal healing comes through service to others, exactly as Carmen and his grandfather would have wanted. Jerome keeps their photographs on his kitchen table next to the folder of legal documents that saved his ranch, daily reminders that love and justice often require the same fierce protection and that the fight for equality never truly ends. The bigger picture reveals lasting change across the American South. What started as one elderly black rancher defending his property becomes a catalyst for federal reform in HOA regulation, developer oversight, and minority property protection, inspiring similar resistance movements in other states facing agricultural displacement with racist undertones. That's how a 68-year-old black railroad welder with a tractor and some chains took down a multi-million-dollar racist fraud scheme and saved his family's legacy while advancing civil rights for everyone. His grandfather would be proud, his grandson will remember, and racists everywhere now know that some black men bite back harder than they ever imagined possible. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to deal with racist fake authority figures trying to steal what's rightfully yours? And if this story inspired you to stand up against racial injustice, hit that subscribe button because next week I'm telling you about the Latina librarian who took down the IRS using nothing but determination and a century-old legal loophole they forgot existed. Another day, another racist HOA drama wrapped up with justice served. If this story made you shake your head at the racism or fist pump for civil rights victory, smash that like button, share your own experiences fighting discrimination below, and subscribe so you'll never miss another battle in the war against injustice.